Welcome back to another episode of Understanding. Oh, hello. Understanding. So.
Hä?
Did you get that? I'm so confused.
Also, ich verstehe nur Bahnhof.
You only understand train station? It's all Greek to me.
Understanding Train Station. Living between cultures with Josh and Feli.
Welcome back to another episode of Understanding Trace. Oh my God, this is not a good start.
Hey Josh, I think that it's a Freudscher Versprecher because I feel like you keep sending strand, so like Strand. I think
you think so?
You need vacation. You said understanding.
Well, I think we could just give it up for this week. You guys know what I'm trying to say.
Yes. What does strand in English mean again? That also has a meaning, right? That word.
To be stranded somewhere, to strand someone somewhere.
But is there also a noun?
Yeah.
Strand? No? Am I getting that confused?
No, I think you're right. There's a strand, like you can have a strand of something. It's like a small string.
Okay.
I think like a thread almost.
Okay.
Now I'm intrigued.
I thought I had like looked this up before where like the word strand, which of course, so in German, Strand, it's spelled the same as strand, means beach. Of course, the English word for that isn't strand, it's beach. But I thought I looked it up before and it had some other meaning.
I'm looking it up right now.
Okay, let me know.
I'm pretty sure it's like a piece of string. No, that can't be right. No one says that. Okay, apparently it's literary Irish. It also means like a beach.
Oh, okay. Maybe it's just like a, old-fashioned kind of English or from another English dialect, a word for beach.
No, but I think it's also, one second, a thin thread of something, often one of a few, twisted around each other to make a string or a rope. Okay. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ears. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, yeah. Okay. What am I saying? Of course, that's a normal word. A strand of hair, yeah.
Maybe we need to do some tongue twisters to warm up, Josh.
Oh, no.
Well, we're the ones, I think I'm going to link that for this episode. We actually have two videos from 2 years ago where you and I did German and English tongue twisters together.
That was back in my old apartment.
Yeah. That was really funny. Well, what's my favorite English tongue twister? Or like the one that I think is the hardest? What's the one with the pepper?
Yeah, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. A peck of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked.
Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. A peck of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked. Mm-hmm. That? Okay. That wasn't very smooth.
I think my favorite German one was the Dichte Fichten.
Of course.
Yeah.
Because it gets dirty. I don't even remember that one. Yeah, something with Finken.
In dichten Fichten
sitzen
die
dicke
Fichten?
Finken.
Die dicke?
Yeah. Dicke Finken. Oh, wow. All right. Well, welcome to a new episode of Understanding Train Station.
Yes.
We hope that maybe your day is going a little bit more structured than ours is. As you can tell, we're kind of all over the place. But I feel like that has been our vibe for the last year and a half, ever since we started this podcast. Today, though,
I've stopped apologizing for it.
Yeah, we're not apologizing for it anymore. Today, we're actually going to talk about this might also be a chaotic topic, but it's kind of a more serious topic, I feel like, in a way, or it can get serious. It's a topic that I've been in touch with ever since I came to the US, I feel like. Because basically, it still happens sometimes, but it especially happened back in the day because I think I just met so many new people. Whenever I meet someone and then they're kind of confused by my name or by my accent or something, and then I like go in, oh yeah, I'm German. People, especially here in the Cincinnati area, would answer all the time with, oh, I'm German too, that's so cool. And it'd be like, wait, where are you from? They'd be like, oh, I'm here from Cincinnati. And I was like, wait, but you just said you're German. And of course what they mean is that their ancestry is German, because that's a huge thing for Americans, is like talking about their ancestry and like identifying with their ancestry. Was that a word? Identifying through.
Oh gosh, prepositions are hard, Feli.
Well, they make their ancestry part of their. They make their ancestry part of their identity. That's what I'm trying to say. So people will also say, I'm Irish, I'm Italian, even though, that means that their great-great-great-grandparents were Italian. Or even if it was just their great-grandparents, I feel like in Germany, we wouldn't phrase it like that. We just wouldn't say, ich bin Italiener or ich bin Ire or ich bin Irisch. If your great-grandparents parents were from that country. You would say, you would just say it like that. You would just say my great-grandparents were from there, or I have some Irish DNA, or you would phrase it differently. And it's just funny how Americans phrase it like that. So that's kind of the topic that we want to talk about today. But before we get more into that, to all of you guys who have travel plans coming up this summer, because it's June now, summer is here. I know it's also nice in Germany, or at least every now and then it's nice. The weather in Germany really isn't that reliable in the summer.
I was going to say, right now it's not particularly nice, but,
but I know
it was nice a couple days ago.
Been, yeah. So yeah, for all of you who have some cool travels lined up this summer and you still would like to improve your language skills for that, specifically for English, Spanish, French, or German, you can do that now with the Lingoda Sprint. They have that Sprint challenge going on again, and it's an intensive language learning challenge where you can get your language skills to the next level within just 2 months, so 60 days. You can either pick the normal sprint, the regular sprint, where you take 15 classes a month for those 2 months. And then if you do that and you follow through and you follow all of the requirements, you can even get up to 50% off your money back. So that's a whole extra layer of motivation. Or you can do the super sprint, which is even more intense. So like it's kind of a time commitment, but it'll also definitely pay off. And it's that you take 30 classes a month for those 2 months for 60 days. And then if you follow through with that and follow all of the requirements, you can actually get all of your money back. So 100% cash back.
Which is a huge advantage compared to other language learning opportunities.
Yeah.
I mean, to be able to learn a language for free if you just stick to it, that's a great opportunity. So if you're interested, they also have a plethora. There's a fancy word for you.
What is that?
A lot. They have quite a few different language options. So if you are interested in learning a language, they offer English, business English, Spanish, French, and German. So the people who are listening to this podcast, if you guys want to understand our German bits that we do sometimes, make sure you check out the German version. But yeah, we encourage you guys checking out any language as well. Lingoda is also great because they're super flexible. Classes are available 24/7, so you'll always be able to find a class that fits with your time frame. Your course as well, you get to choose the courses that you want to take and design your own experience. And you're always learning from native level speakers as well. So it's a great opportunity. If you guys are interested and want to sign up, make sure that you use our code. It's UTSJune, and it will help you save 20 euros or $25 off of the deposit. You'll find all of that information in the description box below the video and also in the show notes if you're listening on a purely podcast audio version.
Yeah, and our link is also in there. So like just click on that link, use the code, save the money, and then if you follow through with it, you'll be able to probably have a full-on conversation in the language of your choice, hopefully German, of course, but I could also maybe understand it if your summer vacation is leading you to a Spanish-speaking country. That would probably make more sense than Germany. But what I'm trying to say, yeah, if you follow through with it, you'll probably be able to have a full-on conversation, or at least a basic conversation in that language in 2 months. And I mean, you know how fast 2 months go by. How crazy would that be if in 2 months your language skills are at a whole other level? So check out Lingoda down below. And now let's get back into our ancestry topic. So as I just said, it's a huge deal in the US. And I mean, you're American, Josh. So I feel like you probably have a lot to say about this.
Yeah, I mean, when you were explaining the experience with people telling you, oh, I'm German, like, the word Fremdschämen somewhat comes to mind.
Secondhand embarrassment.
Yeah. But at the same time, it's just a way of speaking, you know? That's the way that people in the US refer to their heritage. Yeah. And it's different than many other parts of the world, but it has to do with the fact that there were so many immigrants that have come to the US that it's just the way that people identify themselves, because there were these communities of Germans, these communities of Italians, and that really was the way they identified themselves. Yeah, of course. So it wasn't weird for people to say, oh, I'm German, I'm Irish. So when I was younger, I would refer to myself as half German, half Irish.
Right. And that's a very common thing, I feel like. Yeah. For like, from a German perspective, I would think, oh, what's your background or what's your nationality? Of course, you're American. I'm German, you're American. And that happens all the time, that people will say, kind of like you said, oh, I'm like a quarter British, a quarter Irish, half Italian. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was something that I was like not proud of, but like I thought it was cool. I enjoyed knowing that part of my heritage and knowing that, okay, I had ancestors that came from this country and ancestors that came from this country, and now we live in the US. But now, since I live outside of the US and have more international friends that come from cultures where you don't obviously speak like that about your heritage, I now say I'm American with ancestry that is German and Irish. I think sometimes my Irish coworkers that I have based in Dublin roll their eyes when I talk about it because that's like a stereotype of the Irish, because they say, oh, the Americans, they always say, oh, I'm Irish too. So it's pretty much the same experience that you have, but just from the Irish perspective as well. Yeah. But no, I mean, because it's something that a lot of people are interested in, but don't necessarily know what their heritage is. There's been like this industry that has arose with ancestry.com and I think it's like 23andMe, where people can send in their DNA and have it analyzed to figure out where they're from, which I actually did that, which in hindsight, I'm like, should I have done that? Just because I don't know if I want some random corporation having my DNA. Too late now.
But I feel like, I don't know if it's most Americans, probably not, but like, I feel like out of all of the Americans I know, to me, it feels like most of them have actually done it. I'm sure it's not the majority of the entire population who has done one of those tests, but I feel like most people have some kind of idea, even if it's maybe their dad has done it and their mom has done it, then they don't really have to do it anymore. They kind of like know. But yeah, that's a very common thing here.
And it can lead to some awkward situations as well within families, like people finding out they have brothers that they didn't know, or siblings that they didn't know, or finding out they were adopted. Like it has led to some interesting family conversations that I think people don't necessarily consider when they do that type of testing, which is just kind of, surprise.
I've heard tons of those stories or people thought that they were of a certain ancestry and then they had like 0% of that ancestry in their blood. And they were like, wait, is my whole like identity what I thought was my identity? Is that all a lie? Like, where does that come from? Where is that misunderstanding that someone in my grandparents or great-grandparents' generation like cheat, and I'm not like someone wasn't even the biological child of who they thought they were, like, you know, things like that. So that's like a whole crazy thing. I get asked this all the time too if I have done a DNA test, which it's funny because I've only ever been asked this by Americans or on YouTube by like people who comment on my channel where like, of course, I can't really tell if they're American or not, but only ever English speaking comments. So this has never been really a thing for me growing up in Germany, and I've also never been asked this by Germans what my ancestry is. What I have been asked growing up, because I went to school in a pretty diverse area of Munich, where we had a lot of people with a migration background, as we say in Germany.
I was going to say that was one point I wanted to bring up. I find this when Germans say that in English, it just sounds so like wrong.
It's kind of hard. I don't know how you would. Yeah, that's how we say it, like Migrationshintergrund. So basically meaning people who either were born in another country and then immigrated to Germany, whether that was by choice or because they were refugees, or it also means that it may have been their parents and they were actually born in Germany, but they grew up in a household that had a different culture. So that's kind of what that means. Sometimes you still use that word, I think, if it's the third generation. So if their grandparents were from that country, I'm sure there's actually a official definition. Yeah, an official definition of like when you can still use that. That's kind of my impression, like how we use that word. I think sometimes it can still be used when it's third generation. But basically what I'm trying to say is that I would sometimes be asked where I'm from because people on YouTube say this a lot, but also people in my environment would say that growing up that I don't look super German. And since I was surrounded by a lot of people from the Balkans, and, you know, Turkey and Middle East and like all these other countries, Asian countries, people sometimes weren't quite sure if I was, you know, if I was one of those people as well. Right, exactly. You know, I look a little bit Eastern European. So I would get that question, but it wasn't phrased the same way as in the US. Like even in that case, it would be like, where are you from or where are your parents from? But it would never be, what are you, or like what's your ancestry or what's your heritage, what's your DNA, like that really. And that's something that was kind of the main points that I'd written down for this episode. It's crazy to me because I feel like Germans and Americans think in different categories in this regard. And I feel like it makes sense because of what you said earlier, like everyone in the US, except for Native Americans, of course, came from somewhere else at some point, and it wasn't too long ago in history. It was like a few centuries ago, sometimes only a couple centuries or even just 1 century ago for some people.
Yeah.
Because there were a lot of wars in Europe in the recent history. So
yeah, I mean, and there's still immigrants coming.
Yeah, of course, exactly. So that's just a big part. Like, people, of course, want to know where they're from because it could be from all over the world. For like a European like me, of course, it's easier for us to trace things back anyways, because usually those records are still there unless they were like destroyed by the war. But for Americans, in a lot of cases, people just left their country. Let's say even if it's a German immigrant, they would have just left Germany, gotten onto a ship in Hanover or somewhere there, traveled over to the US, and then they didn't really bring their documents over. Or like a lot of the stuff wasn't really properly documented. What was documented was like when they arrived in the US, but a lot of the stuff from before then gets lost. So like it kind of makes sense why Americans have to rely more on like the whole DNA testing, whereas in Europe, we have that information available anyways. And if we wanted to, we could trace it back way more easily. And usually families kind of already have that common knowledge that, oh, one of your great-great-grandparents was from this country, because they just know that it's just been communicated throughout the generations. So to us, that fascination just isn't there as much, because in most cases, as I said, we know, but also even if we don't know, we can kind of assume that it's from that general area. Like that most people, probably our ancestors didn't travel through the entire world. They were probably from like the same region we're from, or maybe a neighboring country, or, not like a huge difference. And for some reason, it doesn't matter as much to us. And I'm saying this from a modern German point of view, because of course, there was a time, and those people, of course, still exist, and those ideologies still exist, where like that does matter to some people. And of course, it used to matter a lot during the Nazi regime, that you had to be a pure German and pure German blood and all that bullshit. Like, sorry, I have to say it like that. And that's also probably one of the reasons why we kind of nowadays don't talk about that at all anymore, because we have had such bad experiences with all of that's kind of just been something that we've completely pushed out of our way of thinking. And I feel like maybe some Americans, when I say it like that, won't believe me, but before I came to the US, I really didn't really think about what my DNA is, or what my genes are. I didn't care about that. All I cared about, and I feel like most other Germans and Europeans in my generation care about, is like when they meet someone, is where are you from? So like basically, where were you? Can you say culturized? No, that's not a word.
Where did you grow up, basically?
Yeah, where did you grow up? With culture did you grow up with? And which language do you speak? So kind of to just like, of course, you still put people in categories in a way, but I feel like that is the more relevant question nowadays, maybe even religion in some cases. But to me, and we don't have to get into this right away, I just want to drop the bomb.
Yeah.
The whole topic of race specifically, which that goes beyond ancestry. That's like a whole different thing, but I just want to mention it because I'm already kind of talking about it. The whole idea of race has never existed in my head. And when I first came to the US, I really had to learn this and adapt to this, that this is a thing here. A lot about it shocked me, but I also learned that given the American history, it's important to also recognize these things. That's a very big difference. And what I mean by that is that in Germany, given our history, we don't really speak about human races anymore. And the German word Rasse has been completely banned. You only use that word when talking about animal breeds, because it might be a coincidence or maybe also not. The word Rasse was used for both human races and animal races, where like in English at least you have that differentiation between race and breed, but I think that's also why that word is already kind of degrading. And then of course all the historical connotations like obviously make this like a very bad and degrading way of talking about people and humans. And so basically I'm gonna wrap it up and give you a chance to respond, and like we can go back to the ancestry thing. I have more to say on this topic, but basically what I was trying to say is that color of skin or like putting people into a race category was never a thing for me growing up in Germany. And I said earlier, some Americans might maybe think that I'm lying or something. And I don't, when I say, oh, I don't see color of skin. But I really didn't in that way. Like, of course, I would notice if someone has a darker skin tone than me. But that, for me, that could have meant anything. That could have meant that they're from Asia, that they're from Southern Europe, that they're from the Middle East, that they're from maybe the US, that they're from Africa. Like, it really, like, that really didn't mean anything to me. Of course, that would maybe raise a question in my head, or, oh, they have like an interesting background that's probably different than mine because they don't look completely white. But I wouldn't have been able to be like, oh, you're half Latino, half African American, or like, you know, anything along those lines. When I first came to the US, I was shocked how not only it's required by on public forms, such as the American census, or when you really take any kind of survey or sign up for university, or I feel like it comes up all the time, or even medical forms. Every time I've gotten a vaccine here, I had to fill it out. It asks for your race as part of the demographic information. You usually have to fill that out in Germany too. Is like, you know, what's your gender, what's your age, or if you want to give your age. And then here on top of that, they usually ask for your race. It comes in categories, like 5 categories or so. And that was very shocking to me. And then in addition to that, people here also seem to think in those categories more, which makes sense if you're always dealing with it. And I remember specifically, even with you, Josh, there was a situation where I think we were talking about a person that we both knew, and you said something along the lines of, oh, is she the half black person? And I literally, I was like, huh. And I had to think about it because I didn't even know. I was like, oh yeah, I guess she probably is. But so I don't really like, to this day, I can't tell what race a person is because I didn't grow up with that. And I often can take apart Latinas and like people who are half black or something like that. Yeah. And it doesn't really matter to me either. Yeah. But it's a whole thing that takes like, that's the thing. Like sometimes you should think about it because
exactly,
it's also important for racism. But anyway, I want to wrap this topic up for now because I know I've gone like way too far and like gone on a whole monologue.
I should have been taking notes because I want to add my comments, but I didn't want to interrupt you.
We can go into every detail of these things because actually I have more to say on each of these things because of course I don't want to make it sound like it's just black and white or whatever because as I said, like it is also important to acknowledge different races, especially in the US and with the history, and to acknowledge racism and things like that. But that's something that I had to get used to, and that's just what I wanted to say. So I'm throwing the ball back to you.
I think there are 2 big things based off of the points that you just made, which I would agree with a lot of them, but my lived experience being, what was the word you used earlier? Culturalized?
No, that wasn't a word.
But being, what's the word we use? Socialized in the US?
Socialized, yeah.
That's
what I meant.
I do catch myself thinking more in those categories, which is not something that I personally like. But I wanted to comment that, like you were saying, there are obviously situations where it makes sense to track ethnicity data and minority data to make sure that people are getting equal access to services or there are legitimate cases in where it should, in my opinion, should be tracked to make sure that equality or equity is oh my gosh, I can't think in English. Is given. Yeah, I mean is present.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I just was thinking about this too. This has happened twice with Spanish people I know, like from Spain. And I mean, you can tell normally when someone looks like a Southern European, like Italians or Iberian people, they tend to have like olive oil skin and darker hair. And it's throughout conversations, I realized that in the US, people would probably call them Latinos. Mm-hmm. But they consider themselves, I'm just quote unquote white. Yeah. Which is just an interest. It's so trivial and so doesn't matter in the end. Yeah. But how 2 people can look at the same person and understand the situation very differently based off of where they were raised and what the environment was around them when it came to categorizing people.
Absolutely.
So I thought that was just an interesting experience. And then taking an even further step back away from race and back to the
original topic,
of ancestry. I think some of the fascination that we have in the U.S. about our ancestry comes from the fact that the U.S. is so far removed from the European countries that a lot of immigrants came from. And obviously, not only European immigrants came to the U.S. I mean, you have African immigrants, and then you have people who were brought to the U.S. as slaves from Africa, and then the rest of the world. I mean, but the U.S. is geographically very distant from a lot of the places that people came from. Yeah. So I think people are looking for a way to relate back to these other countries that they came from and these other cultures that, at least when I lived in the U.S., I saw as more interesting. There was so much variety and so much history in the cultures as opposed to the U.S. where everything was kind of boring, new. Right. So I think that also maybe plays into the fascination that people have, is they're looking for a connection back to this more interesting way of life that could have been theirs had their families not left.
And they think it's cool that maybe they're Italian or like one of those things. Yeah, because then they can identify with the cool things that happen in Italy, or like the culture, the food, the language.
The fettuccine Alfredo.
that aren't actually Italian. But yeah, I can totally relate to that. And I mean, I have gotten used to it over time. Like now I know that when someone says, oh, I'm German, like they misunderstand what I'm saying basically. And then I have to clarify. I have to be like, no, I'm actually from Germany. I grew up there. I went to school there. I went to college there. All those things. And then they're like, oh, then the whole like spiel comes into place where I have to explain why I'm here and why I speak such good English. Blah blah blah. Yeah. But what sometimes happens, this doesn't happen a whole lot, but that's still kind of, I don't know, cringy. I don't know if cringy is the right word, but it kind of rubs me the wrong way. And I know they don't mean anything bad by it. It just happened last week again, and that's why I'm even thinking about this, is sometimes people then speak of Germans and then say we. Like, there was a person there who had German ancestry, and I don't remember what he was talking about. Maybe he was even just talking about sports, but like the national team or something like that. Because I know, like, of course, people will say we when they talk about their club that they're rooting for. But it was something else, or maybe it was like political move or something about the whole country of Germany. Like, and I was there, I was present, and this person said we. And I know that they weren't born in Germany, right? They don't speak German, nothing like that. And that was just kind of, I wasn't mad at them or anything, but it just felt like, I don't know if we're a we. Like, I know you have German ancestry, but I don't know if you're really one of us. You know what I mean? Like,
no, that would make me uncomfortable too, I think. Or not uncomfortable, just kind of like, oh, that's kind of weird.
That's kind of the thing, I think, that rubs some Europeans or people from those countries the wrong way, is when they kind of, not all people do that, of course, but some people almost make it seem like, oh, we're the same. Oh, we're both German. And where it's like, yeah, I mean, I'm sure of course you have the German ancestry, and maybe, I'm sure that is in your genes somewhere, and maybe even culturally that has carried over through the generations. But honestly, in most cases, it hasn't that much. Yeah. In most cases, maybe like there's a family recipe that has carried over, but in most cases, the language has been lost like generations ago. And it's like, even if that's the case, that doesn't like make us that much alike, you know, like you're still from this continent and you were raised in this culture. Exactly. And I personally don't believe that genes connect you all that much. Like, I think that your environment is like really what makes a person, and the culture that they grow up with, and the language, like all those other factors. And that's just sometimes, you know, it's just weird to deal with as someone from that country, to be kind of thrown into the same group with those people, and they think, oh yeah, I'm the same, I'm German, I get to claim all that culture as my own. And that feels a little weird, being from that country. And I'm not even trying to say like, oh, you guys can't say that anymore. Like, if any of our listeners do that, I mean, go ahead. If it makes you feel good. I'm just saying, basically, from my perspective, it just sometimes I don't get mad, as I said, but it just feels a little off, a little wrong.
I actually see what you're saying. I have, for whatever reason, I haven't like done the thought exercise of thinking, okay, what if someone, Because it happens very rarely with the U.S. when you're abroad and someone says like, "Oh, I'm American," because we are a country that's made up of people for the most part, besides Native Americans, that came there.
Yeah.
So we're always referring to where we came from. But if someone who grew up outside of the U.S. Really didn't have any connection to the U.S. as far as like language or their parents being from there, was like, "Oh yeah, I'm American too," it would make me uncomfortable. I would be like, okay, I mean, like, sure.
Yeah, but... or maybe, like, what if he said something like, he would, like, turn to you and, like, say, like, "Oh, us Americans, we do this and that." Like, he would kind of, like, put you guys in one group.
It would make me uncomfortable. Like, not necessarily in a bad way, but just, like...
Yeah, of course, it's not supposed to be, like, discriminating or anything like that. No. It's more just, like, that it just seems so, I think you said that earlier, so trivial, so random of, like, oh, are we...
are we a we?
Yeah, exactly.
Especially
is there really
if you
a connection?
Especially because, like you said, I really think it comes down to where you are socialized. And, like, and I've noticed that more and more, like, talking, since I live with an international mishmash of people, like, it's so different. Each country has their own education system, and it's so those are such impactful years of your life that that I think is more important than quote unquote what your ancestry is or what race you are or whatever that may be.
Yeah. And it's actually something that I also deal with in a professional way, quote unquote professional, with like all my YouTube content and even with this podcast, because a large part of my audience is German Americans, is what I like to refer to them as. So like basically instead of saying, oh, they're Germans, like they're German Americans, meaning most of them are Americans with German ancestry that lies back a few generations. Some of them, of course, have like rather recent German ancestry, but most of them have that like typical thing what we talked about. Their ancestors came in the 19th or 18th century from Germany to the US. And then they're super interested in their ancestry, which is cool. And they did all the research and maybe even did like family research and went to Germany and looked into old records and things like that. Maybe even picked up the language again and have that interest there. But that's like a different group. And I basically, I differentiate between the modern Germans and those people. Those are German Americans. And it's also the case here with organizations. So like there's a lot of German American organizations in the US, and specifically in the Cincinnati area we have a lot, because this is a very traditionally German area. I think the most common ancestry in the Cincinnati area is German. So yeah, a lot of German settlers settled here. This is part of the so-called German triangle in the Midwest between Milwaukee, Cincinnati, and St. Louis. So yeah, there's a lot of organizations here that have like festivals, like Schützenfest and Oktoberfest and Maifest, and some celebrate Fasching and Karneval and those kinds of things. And those celebrations, in my mind, also like they of course think, oh, this is German food, this is a German celebration. To me, I basically put it into the category of this is German American. And this also has a right to exist, but it's not quite the same as modern German culture. And a lot of it goes back to like older German culture from like 150, 200 years ago. And that's super cool. But in a lot of cases, it's just not what you would do in Germany, what you would eat, how you would dress, how you would host a festival. For example, just two like food examples that they have here a lot that of course people refer to.
Beer cheese.
That wasn't even part of it.
Oh, really?
But yeah, I was thinking of Geta and sauerkraut balls. Yeah. Sauerkraut balls that people think are German foods. But they're not. I think those two are actually pretty specific to this region. So if you're American from another part of the country, you might not know what I'm talking about. So Geta is spelled Goetta and is basically some kind of sausage that's like mixed with oats. And is there other stuff in there too?
I'm sure there's lots of spices, but essentially what it comes down to sausage and oats mixed together. Yeah,
and then basically I feel like the way it's served usually is almost like a patty, like it's like a big piece that's then fried in the pan. Usually, right?
That's something that you don't find in Germany, are the sleeves of sausage.
Yeah, that's not sausage to us, really.
Exactly. So that in the U.S. that's what is very common. You'll get like a sleeve of sausage. Maybe we can find a picture of it at some point.
Yeah.
And then you just can cut off a slice and then fry it in a pan.
Yeah. So basically, what it looks more like a hamburger patty to me. Like that's kind of what I would describe the shape as. Of course, me as a vegetarian, I really can't give you that much more information about Gouda. I've never had it. I wouldn't really be able to compare it to other foods in Germany. I know that technically it does have a German origin, like apparently a very regional dish that was then brought over by German immigrants, and then because they basically they cut it with oats, like strecken.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They cut it with oats.
So they cut it with oats and other things. I think they used mainly the bad meat leftovers at the time because they were like mainly poor German immigrants or just immigrants from other countries even that needed food that was cheap. So what they would do to be able to eat meat is like take all the food leftovers and then add oats to it, and then that's why Gouda became such a popular thing here. And it's not 100% the same recipe still because, as I said, they kind of adapted it. But now it's a huge thing here in the Cincinnati area, and everyone thinks, or most people think, that it's a German dish. But nope, if you go to Germany and ask for Gouda, nobody will know what you're talking about. I think the original version where it originates from is called Grützwurst.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken. And then another thing is sauerkraut balls that I feel like a lot of Americans also think I would love. And do you miss all the sauerkraut balls from home, or do you miss the sauerkraut where it's like, nope, I don't miss the sauerkraut because I almost never eat. Why do I say it's so American? I don't eat sauerkraut a whole lot in Germany, maybe like once a year or like even less than that, honestly. If anything, I eat more of the red cabbage, the Blaukraut or Rotkraut. But in the US, of course, I feel like that's so typical. They have taken the sauerkraut and then they fry it. They deep fry it. And then it's basically like
it is pretty good, though.
I don't like it. I've only ever tried it once. I did not like it. So it's basically sauerkraut and then it has a fried shell around it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of random.
I think it's really tasty.
Yeah, I mean,
fried
you grew
pickles
up with
too,
it.
and I mean, they're all, that's all my childhood right there. So
but you can tell like by those kinds of things, like the Americans here really, really celebrate their ancestry, their German ancestry, but also their other ancestry. There's Italian fests happening. Are there like Irish festivals around here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially, I think there's a big Irish festival in Dayton.
Okay. And then, of course, there is St. Patrick's Day that is celebrated all over the country, of course. And that
we
is
even
also
celebrated it together.
We did. That's like, I honestly didn't even think about that at first because it's more of this like big commercial thing. But of course, on St. Patrick's Day, people who have Irish ancestry also like talk about it. And isn't there even a rule that if you have Irish ancestry, isn't there something like a party rule where like other people buy you a drink or
I don't know about that.
Okay.
I was always more focused on the German side of my family history, which was very saddening to my grandma, who's more on the Irish side of things. But I think it was her grandparents who came here, but she didn't know them, and they. My great grandmother, so my grandma's mom, she used to always throw a huge St. Patrick's Day party and like sing the songs that she used to sing with her family, and so like there are still a lot of connections to Ireland in that sense, but it's very, very similar to the situation that you have with the German Americans. You have the Irish Americans,
right?
And I think that I really do think that's the best way to describe them is. Describe themselves as Irish American, German American. And I just wanted to talk a little bit as well about how this is when we talk about ancestry and being interested in your ancestry, there's a cool show called Finding Your Roots that's on PBS in the US with I think his name is Henry Louis Gates. And he sits down with celebrities and they go through their family ancestry. So like, I know he's done it with Amy Schumer, Andy Samberg, with a lot of other famous people as well. And it's super interesting because they go through these stories of how their family ended up in the U.S. and where they're originally from. And a lot of people don't know the stories. But he also does stories with African Americans. And one thing I've realized through that is how privileged I am to know what countries my my family came from. And I have some connection, even, well, I mean, for me, I guess it's a pretty huge connection since I live in Germany now. But I'm able to have that connection with my ancestry and where my family came from, which isn't the case for a lot of African Americans and Black people in the U.S. Because they were stolen from their home country and then brought here with very little records. They don't even know what their family, quote unquote, true family name is oftentimes. Because
they then had to take their master's last name in a lot of cases, right? It's like the white family who owned them, they would take their last name.
Exactly. So I just wanted to mention that as well, that for white Americans, for most white Americans, it's something that I feel like we don't think about. And it's like a huge thing that we are into our ancestry and, the Germans and the Italians or whatever it may be. But for Black people in the U.S., and obviously it's not everyone, because I have quite a few friends whose families moved from Africa more recently, and they have a huge connection to where they're from. And the food is so good. I love Nigerian food. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that as well, that's also can be a difficult topic for a lot of people in the U.S.
Absolutely. I actually want to get back to that here in a second, when I want to get back to that whole race topic. But one more thing that just came to my mind when you just talked about the last names is that I feel like that's also such a big reason why people maybe still identify with that ancestry so much and even start digging, is because a lot of people here do have that German or Italian or French or whatever, or Irish or Scottish or, like blah, 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 etc. last name. Like you do, for example. You've mentioned this before. You have a German last name, and that was one of the reasons why you were interested in maybe learning that language and learning German. And I feel like a lot of people have that too. And then they kind of know that they mispronounced their own last name. And I know that I get that question a lot by German Americans who then ask me, hey, how would you actually pronounce this last name in German? Because, of course, we pronounce it the American way, probably completely mispronounce it. But it's the same with, French last names that I feel like I come across every now and then, where I feel like, oh, that's so funny that they pronounce it like that. Because, me as a German, we have some French words in our language, and we're just very used to pronouncing them the French way. And then
I there was one French family actually at my high school. The parents were from France, but the kids grew up with me, and their last name was, we called them Terrier, but it would be Terrier. And it's just funny sometimes the pronunciations that end up arising out of these cultural last names. I even think of Frau König, my German teacher. No one says König or even König. It's Koenig.
Oh, I never even thought about that. That didn't even come up in our episode with her.
No, so people call her Mrs. Koenig.
And not Koenig? Or
no.
Interesting.
People say Koenig.
Does she go with the OE spelling? Oh, okay. Well, I mean, there's also all these brands and companies here in the area that used to be German, but then are mispronounced. So, for example, Kroger, I think was it Kröger?
I think it was Kröger.
Probably, yeah. So basically they just dropped the umlaut and now it's pronounced Kroger. Or even the architect of the Roebling Suspension Bridge here that also designed the Brooklyn Bridge in New York, his name, the bridge is pronounced Roebling in English, Roebling Bridge. But of course it was OE, so in German it would be pronounced Röbling.
The same goes for Moorline, right?
Right,
it should be Moorline.
That's a brewery here. Yeah, all those, there's so many examples, honestly, countless examples for this. And I mean, I've honestly gotten used to it by now, to mispronouncing all these names. But at first it was really weird. Because, to me, it's normal. If something looks German, of course, I want to pronounce it German because that's my native language. And then I have to basically think, oh, how would they mispronounce it here?
That happened to me actually today at work. I was calling someone whose last name was Smith, but he was German.
Oh, so was it Smith?
So I was like, I don't know how I'm supposed to, because what do I call him? Herr Smith? Herr Smith? That
sounds wrong.
But if he's also not, if he doesn't speak much English, or if he truly, I didn't know him, but I was reaching out to him, and I just wasn't sure. Luckily, he didn't answer, so I didn't have that problem. But it definitely went through my brain. I was like, oh my gosh, do I go hard American and call him Mr. Smith?
Yeah. Honestly, that's probably what I would do. If you want my advice on that, I feel like even as a German, that last name in German, Schmidt, I've never heard that before. I mean, obviously Schmidt exists, but if it's not spelled with SCH, then even my first impression would just be like, oh, it's Smith. Like it's an English last name.
No.
Like, you mean the German pronunciation of the TH? Yeah.
Which you wouldn't do, it would just be Smith.
No, I wouldn't. But I mean, how unfortunate would it be if that person struggles with pronouncing the TH and their last name is Smith?
That would be rough.
That would suck.
That would be difficult. But yeah, I think you're right with the last name being something that really gets people interested as well.
Yeah, I think so. Well, okay, now, as I said, I kind of wanted to circle back to all the things that I brought up earlier. And I know I've mentioned a lot of this before in the episode with Jay, I think, Jay Samuels.
Yeah.
Who is, he grew up in both countries, and he's half American, half German, and he's also half black. So like we kind of talked about that whole race topic with him. I've also mentioned it in some of my videos several times. So if you watch my YouTube videos, you probably know about this. And I mentioned it earlier. So like when I first came here, I was really shocked about this whole categorizing yourself into a human race, because of course I grew up with the idea that there's only one human race and human races aren't a thing. Now, as I said, this is the thing on a lot of different forms. For me, of course, it's usually pretty easy. Like it usually comes with about 5 or 6 different options. So they're usually white or Caucasian, then black or African American. It like every form is a little bit different, so it kind of depends. Then American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, and Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander. Those are usually the races. And then on top of that, you usually have to choose your ethnicity, which you can only usually choose between Hispanic and non-Hispanic, which has a whole historical background why that is the case. But let me start at the beginning. So to me as a German, of course, at first that felt like so wrong that was on a form, because, you know, to us with the whole Nazi background, that just seems like racism at its best. That just seems like, what do you mean? I have to classify myself as white. And at the time, I also, of course, I like knew a little bit of American pop culture, but I also didn't really realize that even those races are part of pop culture here too. So basically like saying something is typical white, or like a white man, like kind of, or, you know, like white
do you know
behavior.
Bo Burnham? Do you know Bo Burnham? White woman's Instagram? I'll have to show it to you later.
You know, or like things are known as typically like culturally black, or like things that black people do. And some of that, of course, is racism, but some of that is also like things that black people actually established themselves because it's part of their culture. So like it's kind of, I wasn't used to this whole mix of like this race category, which to me just seemed wrong, as I said. And then, but it's also part of everyday life. It doesn't only take place on those forms. It also kind of transfers over in everyday life. But that's going a little bit too far. So let's go back to those forms. So to me, that would definitely 100% be illegal to even ask for that in Germany. And then, of course, first of all, I wondered, how can you even categorize humans in 5 or 6 different human races? That seems impossible. And as you said earlier, Josh, trivial, because like in some cases, like for you and I, it's kind of easy. Okay, we're white, we're boring. Like if you're originally from Europe, for example, you are just white. But most people aren't just that. Like most people are a wild mix of things, right? And especially with the categories of Asian, like I don't understand, like Asia is such a big country. How does that make any sense? Like people there look so different and are from different cultures and countries. I feel like, I don't know if any... Especially
considering that in the UK, if you refer to someone as Asian, you also are referring to Indians. Like people from India or Pakistan, the Indian subcontinent.
I mean, it's part of the Asian continent.
Exactly. Yeah. Which in the US, you would never call someone who's from India or Pakistan Asian.
Did we ask Sheffy when we did the episode with her what she checks? What
think we did.
Box do Indians check? Because that's the thing. Like I don't understand how there's only 5 or 6 options, and then in some cases it's like an option to say I don't want to say which race I am, or you can cross other and add it. But still, I feel like that the fact that those categories are there already puts that categorization in your head and in people's head. And the thing is, this starts pretty early in the US. Like even I think as kids, people oftentimes have to put themselves in that category. And I'm just wondering, how does that feel to someone who is a mix of several races? They always have to basically make that part of their identity. Even though they're just a child, they should just think that they're human. They shouldn't think, oh, I'm half this and half that, and that makes me a minority. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That was just a very new idea to me. Now, of course, I asked all my questions to people in the US and I did my research, and I do understand what you said earlier, Josh, that most of these forms are actually there. This question is asked to ensure diversity. So the opposite of racism and discrimination. It's actually there to ensure that all these different human races, I still struggle saying that, are represented in whatever this is, maybe whether it's a survey or university enrollment. Some people even get like privileges because of that. There's like certain quotas sometimes where this actually matters, that there's a certain quota of African Americans that are represented. I want to say that Native Americans even get like things for free and stuff, right?
I'm not sure, but there are oftentimes programs for minority communities, Native Americans being included.
Yeah, which I mean is cool, and then I feel like that's the least the United States of America can do to them or can do for them. But still, it was just a weird thing for me to get used to, and I still sometimes struggle with this because I still have this like ambivalent view at this whole topic, because I feel like on the one hand, yes, it's good that is recognized and that diversity is pursued and that you recognize where the minorities are and how much of each minority is represented. And as I said earlier, I learned, especially throughout like Black Lives Matter in 2020 and all of that, I learned how the US just has such a different history from Germany. I mean, I obviously knew that before, but just racism in Germany and racism in the US is just so different. You can hardly compare, because in the US it's a historical phenomenon. It's systemic. It's been part of this country's DNA forever, and it's more than just social discrimination. It's way more than that. And like, of course, especially African Americans who are descendants of American slaves have their whole own like identity that we don't have that kind of group of people in Germany, at least not in the same way as African Americans here. But then again, what you said earlier, like I find it so weird, like that there's a category of Black/African American, but as you said, culturally that could mean anything. Like a Black person could be African American, as in, when I say African American, I usually think, descendant of a slave, so like has been in this country for a long time. But they could also be straight from Africa, like first generation Nigerian, as you said, or they could be from France, or they could be from an Asian country. Like there are so many Black people all over the world, like that have black or dark skin. And that just, also seems so weird to me. But on the one hand, I understand that this has to be recognized. On the other hand, I still feel like I don't know if it's the right message to send, that people grow up with these categories when they're very little and are always used to making these differences between people. Because as I said, I never did that growing up in Germany. I'm sure other people do. Like, I'm sure not every German is like me, but I genuinely did not see skin color or like especially race like that, because I didn't know what human races that there were, because I feel like there are no human races. To me, it was like everyone had a specific background, of course, and like I would never have put people into categories like that. And so now I do that more because I have been socialized in the US a little bit through all these forums and through all these discussions, and by being part of this culture where that is brought up, I mean, even by the people themselves, like people identify themselves as Black or Asian or like, these categories. And I don't know if I like that. Like you said earlier, like, I don't know if I like that pops up into my head now more than it used to. Like, even with, I used to have like, Black roommates, and I remember I would just talk to my parents about them, and they couldn't always keep up with all the names of all of my roommates. So my dad would be like I described my one roommate. I was like, oh yeah, she's the one you met. Like, she was the one who said this and this, or like, she's the one who we went to the graduation with. Like, I would describe her, and he was like, oh, she's the Black girl. I was like, oh yeah, I guess so. That doesn't even like pop into my mind at first, and now it does more. So yeah, I think that's what I was kind of trying to say. I still feel ambivalent about it, even though I see the point of it, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting because for me, it's a little bit of the flip side. Like, I think because I do recognize how embedded racism or just the thought process of defining people by race is built into me based off of the way that I grew up in the U.S. I do try to avoid using skin color as the main way of describing someone. Because I don't like that. I mean, people are more than just their skin color, obviously. So, like, why am I going for that necessarily? Yes, it is convenient and easy because people know, but I think it's sometimes can be trivial. I don't know how I feel about that necessarily, but that's just something in my thought process that I've become aware of, at least, we'll say. Yeah. But what I wanted to say as well is it's a little bit of a catch-22, the topic that you were just talking about, where
what's that mean?
So a catch-22 is a problematic situation for which the only solution is denied by a circumstance inherent in the problem or by a rule.
Okay, that didn't help me that much, but just go on.
So essentially what I'm trying to say, and this is the perfect example of a catch-22. Mm-hmm. So because we recognize that there is racism from whatever history there has been, you have to put things in place to try to counteract that racism and adjust for the injustices and the inequities of the past. Hence, us implementing these type of forms. The pure existence of these forms, though, perpetuates the history of racism and the inequities.
Yeah,
and
so it's a Teufelskreis.
Yeah, Teufelskreis. Yeah, exactly. So you end up in this cycle that by trying to fix the problem, you perpetuate the problem.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the answer is, and I know you don't know what the answer is.
No, I don't. I'm not even saying like it's like per se just bad that the U.S. has this. It was just completely new to me. Exactly. And even though I understand its purpose, I still don't know if it's the best solution. And I wish that there would be a way to solve this without putting these categories into people's heads. Because as you said, it's a Teufelskreis. It's going to reinforce those categories. Exactly.
So I mean, I agree with you in that regard for sure. I think the most important thing is for people to have friends that aren't like them and understand it. Try to put yourself in another person's shoes, as best as possible. There's a controversial racism expert, or she is known for her brown eye, blue eye experiment. Her name is Jane Elliott. And I think
is she the
she's
teacher?
Short,
the older lady, like gray hair. Yeah, I think I know her.
She can be rather militant in her approach, but I think I agree with a lot of the stuff that she says, personally. And I think if you guys are interested in this topic and just trying to make yourself aware of racism, I think that's a great resource. Watch some of the videos on her that you can find on YouTube. But yeah, it definitely is a kind of a never-ending circle that is a catch-22.
Yeah. So basically, obviously, this episode wasn't supposed to be about race and racism in the U.S. because that's a whole, there's so many books about this topic, and we are obviously not the experts on this. It's just, something that I started learning more about being in this country because it's just the topic exists. Of course, I'm not trying to say that racism and discrimination doesn't exist in Germany, because of course that is also a problem that we deal with in Germany, but it's just, it shows itself in very different ways, I feel like, and it has a very different background in the US. And in Germany, I feel like, at least nowadays, with the exception of certain neo-Nazis and people like that, most of racism and discrimination goes back to religion and immigration status, or immigration background, more so than just pure color of skin, which of course also happens, but it's mostly because people think, oh, this person looks like they're an Syrian refugee and I hate them, I don't like immigrants, just very close-minded people who then therefore discriminate against people. But I feel like it just has more of a background of immigration and religion and things like that, rather than just straight up human races, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think it's hard to figure out exactly where the main differentiation is, but I think the biggest thing is how have the non-white communities ended up in each culture, you know? And yeah, it's a huge topic, and I don't want us to get too deep into it.
No, and I'm also not trying to like claim, oh, this is the way it is or anything like that.
Yeah,
this is
no,
just kind of how
not.
I would describe it from my personal perception overall as a generalization. One thing that I just realized that I didn't explain, and I'm just going to get back to that super quickly because people might have questions about this, is that we said that there's race on those forms and then ethnicity, and ethnicity only differentiates between Hispanic and non-Hispanic, which I obviously found super weird at first because like
I've always
ethnicity, ethnicity is actually the term that I can identify with more than human race. But of course, there are so many ethnicities in this world, and just like summarizing it super briefly, it seems to have a historical background in the US where basically, specifically Mexicans, but also other Hispanic people wanted that themselves, and they were granted that they would legally pass as white. So like on those forms, they were able to claim that they are white, like their race is white, which would then grant them certain privileges. There was even a time in the US where you couldn't have US citizenship unless you were white. Things like that. And from what I read, please don't like hold me accountable to all the details about this, but I think that the US basically even promised that to the Mexicans when they took over part of their land, that they would get citizenship and all those privileges. And therefore, the Mexican people, and I think other Latinx people as well, wanted that legal white status. But then in order to still consider them in the statistics, they added that ethnicity thing where it was like, okay, so even if you checked white, are you Hispanic or non-Hispanic, basically. But also, you could have checked any other category in the first of the race. So like even a black person can pass as Hispanic, therefore. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of random.
And I mean, that brings us back to the point, like, if many Dominicans, for example, and Puerto Ricans, people in the Caribbean have they're black too. I mean, there's such a large population that,
and so are many people from Asia,
slaves.
like from Sri Lanka, or like, you know.
It can be mind-boggling sometimes and frustrating.
It's so random, but basically that's the explanation as to why there is a specific Hispanic and non-Hispanic category that's basically just, it has to do with American history. And rights that the Hispanic people fought for, that now, of course, Hispanic people don't want to be passing as white anymore, usually. Like, people are proud of their heritage now, but that was a different time in history.
Yeah, it's just interesting that it seems like these categories have come to be in the US through a lot of social justice pushes, people trying to rectify the situation. But like I said, just kind of ending up in this catch-22 where it can somewhat perpetuate. But I would be really interested in knowing what other people, I mean, we're two white people talking about the subject as well. So if I would be interested in the comment section and on Instagram and whatnot, getting people's feedback about how they see the situation. Because I mean, these are just our two perspectives and our two lived experiences, and we are by no means saying that we have a monopoly on what the best way to do things or even how to view the situation. So I definitely would enjoy you guys letting us know in the comments what you think.
Yeah, even like for me, of course, I don't represent every German's view on the topic, and I just kind of try to explain the difference, how I think that I said that earlier, but just to make that clear again, how I perceive that whole topic growing up in Germany. And of course, that also differs from region to region, from generation to generation, maybe even like my personal upbringing, how my parents raised me. As I said, I went to a school with like a lot of people from different cultures. So maybe I'm even a little bit more open than the average German is to this, or maybe I experienced less discrimination because I was just immersed in the whole multicultural part of Germany, and not every city or neighborhood or village in Germany is that open, of course. So what I'm trying to say is that was just my personal experience. That does not represent every other German's experience. And especially to our German listeners and viewers, I would like to know if you somewhat agree with my perception, if you kind of knew what I meant, what I said in this episode, or if you completely disagree and have completely different experiences. If so, please head over to YouTube, or if you're already on YouTube, just comment down below, let us know, send us a message on Instagram. We actually just recently cleaned up our Instagram inbox. So like for all of you who've maybe waited for a response for a few weeks. Well, we haven't really been that active on Instagram recently, but we made sure that we went through all of the messages. So we're up to date now. We're going to read your messages if you send us one on there. And I would actually also like to maybe even bring it into one of our next episodes or share it on Instagram or on one of those platforms. Basically, share your guys's opinions and stories and include it into our future content in one way or the other.
I think that would be a great idea, especially because I feel like this episode has been pretty heavy America focused or US focused when it comes to especially racism, but this was supposed to be about ancestry.
Ancestry. I'm sorry, I kind of took it into their direction.
It's okay, but I mean I find both topics they're somewhat intertwined.
A little.
So I think that's how we ended up very US centric, is because ancestry is such a bigger topic in the US than it is Germany. But it would be interesting to hear, like I said, your perspectives that aren't necessarily US centric.
Yeah, and also about the topic of ancestry itself too. Like if maybe you're German and you feel like, no, what are you talking about, Feli? Like ancestry is totally important to me, and I have done a DNA test because of course some Germans do that too. I almost did it. I was about to do it, and then I did some more research, like you said earlier at the beginning of the episode, and then I decided that I don't think I need to know bad enough because I pretty much know my ancestry, that I don't think I want a company to own my DNA because you never know what they're going to do with it in the future. So I was kind of like, you know what? I'm fine.
Exactly. And one thing I forgot to mention that I wanted to just make sure that we included in this episode too is it's very, very common in American families, not just white American families, but also Black American families. There's just like this thread of everyone thinks that they have like 1/64th Native American in their family.
Okay.
And that was like a thing in our family as well. Where we're like, oh yeah, our great grandmother, she was Cherokee. Okay. And I've heard that from a lot of people, that everyone says, oh yeah, we have a Cherokee, whatever it may be, relative in the past. Unfortunately, after doing the test, that wasn't the case. And I think that those type of testing options have really ruined a lot of people's narratives about having Native American connections.
Yeah. I actually also have one more thing to say. Sorry, guys. We're like, we're going to wrap it up. And then it's like, never mind. We have like 3 more things to say. But just one more thing about those tests. Those can be fairly accurate, I think. But also, I mean, be careful when you take those tests, because from my personal just like research, I'm not an expert in this, but from what it seems like, those aren't always 100% accurate. I've seen like countless examples where like identical twins had different results, even though they should have been exactly the same results. And, just like things that didn't seem to make sense in some cases. So I don't think you can 100% rely on those results, especially considering that those are capitalist companies. Like they're not necessarily doing this for research purposes. So like who knows how much, how accurate they're actually conducting those tests. But definitely an interesting thing. And I would still like to know what mine would have said, but, I'm not going to do that for now. So yeah, thank you guys so much for listening. We're looking forward to reading all of your comments and messages about the topic. And yeah, we will be back in 2 weeks on Thursday with a new episode. In the meantime, you obviously know you can subscribe and leave us a review, even on Spotify. I mentioned that like few weeks ago, I think, for the first time. And then I don't think I mentioned that a whole lot, but we actually got quite a few reviews on Spotify, and I'm very impressed. Thank you guys for that. I haven't looked at them. Yeah, I think we've almost gotten like 200 reviews on Spotify. Wow. And we're not that big of a podcast. So that's actually really cool. Keep doing that, guys. Keep leaving us those reviews on Apple Podcasts. You can even write like a whole like review. On Spotify, I think it's just the stars, the rating. It's not a review, it's a rating. And then of course on YouTube, you can subscribe, you can give us a thumbs up, all those cool things. And if you want to support us beyond that, you can even join our Patreon family on patreon.com/understandingtrainstation. We even had another Patreon hangout a couple days ago that was very, very full and very interesting, actually. We just basically talked about all the last 3 episodes and like, got to get everyone's feedback on those topics in real life, in person. So that's actually a really nice way of communicating with you guys. So if you want to join that Patreon family, you can do so. There's different tiers that you can join. So it's basically like you donate money to us monthly, but you can, as I said, you can pick between different money tiers. And then you can get stuff in return from us. So yeah, thank you guys so much for your support, and you will hear from us in 2 weeks.
See you then.
Tschüss.
Ciao.